Good morning. Today is January.
Today's not January
You got
6th.
You got it in my mind. May the 15th, 2023. I'm assuming the Celtics won, is what I'm assuming here. So I'm really happy. Great day. Great Monday to kick off the week. And this morning we'll be talking about greed, avarice on the Dear Church podcast. Do you have any comments on that, Jinsuk?
Wait, by the time that the podcast is released, the
Yeah.
series would have ended.
Yeah, meaning that they would have won.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I am crazy.
There's a game tonight.
No, there's a game tonight, and
And
then
on
on
Sunday.
Sunday.
if they win, they would play on Sunday because we're recording on Thursday the 11th. So I'm assuming they had won.
Is it 2-3 right now?
Yeah, the Celtics are down, but it's just like
Ooh,
it's
that's rough.
easy. But I'm assuming they won. If they didn't, this would have aged poorly.
Yeah, my money's on the Bucks.
They're not. They've already been out. But we'll be talking about avarice and greed this morning once again. It's going to be a good one. You are listening to the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang.
I'm Junzuk.
I am not Pastor Eugene.
Oh, I was wondering what you were going to say. I thought you were going to be extremely disrespectful, like always. But Pastor Eugene and Chunsuk are here. I'm here too. And we're talking about greed and avarice. Why do they call it avarice? Why do they, that's a new word, avarice. But today we'll be talking about greed. And I wanted to just maybe read some Bible verses that talk about greed that we see in the Word. And the first passage is from Luke chapter 12, verse 15. And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Psalm 52:7 reads, "See the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and sought refuge in his own destruction." 1 Corinthians 5:11. "But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or a swindler, not even to eat with such a one." Ooh, can't even eat with them. Can't eat with them fools. This is Proverbs 15, verse 27. We're going through a lot of Proverbs these days. Very wise. "Whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household, but he who hates bribes will live." And then I just wanted to read one more proverb. 28:22. "A stingy man hastens after wealth and does not know that poverty will come upon him." So the Bible seems to tell us that greed is not a good thing. Covetousness, which we covered a little bit last week, is not a good thing. So what does it mean to be greedy when the Bible talks about being greedy? Greedy.
Yeah. Well, greed is pretty similar to covetousness. And there is a difference, just like we talked about with jealousy
Yes.
and envy. But
And envy.
I think greed is the inordinate or just the imbalanced desire, the desire that has gone amok, the corrupted desire for gain. That's what most people mean by greed.
The corrupted desire for gain. Gotcha.
Yeah. Unless you're Michael Douglas in Wall Street, when 1987, that movie Wall Street, he plays a villain, Gordon Gekko.
I've
He
never
makes
seen
this
this
big
film.
speech, and he says, "Greed is good."
Oh, interesting. That's one of the questions that I have with Gordon Gekko. So corrupt desire for gain. It seems that oftentimes greed can even be defined as hoarding or holding on to something that you already have and not giving. Is that play into it at all?
Yeah, when we say people are greedy, sure, it's just the desire for more. So you can't give up things.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you would want to hold on to things too because you need more and more and more. That's one corrupt version or of that desire, which we call greed.
Gotcha.
To continue
Okay.
to want more, to hold on to things and not give it away because, I think it has a lot to do with just this, what do you call it? Zero sum game. Yeah.
I never knew what that was.
Zero sum.
Yeah.
There are some things that are zero sum. There aren't. There are some things that are not zero sum. We just think everything is zero sum when you're greedy.
No, I mean, like, I don't know what zero sum.
Zero sum is a limited number of, let's say, slices in an apple pie. So if I give you a slice,
Okay.
that's one less slice I have.
Yeah.
That's zero sum. There are things in
okay,
life that
okay.
are zero sum. For instance, if you like the girl named Sally, okay?
Angela's not gonna like this one.
Yeah. And another boy, let's
Uh-huh.
call him June, okay? June also likes Sally,
Uh-huh.
okay? That's zero sum in the sense that only one person will end up with Sally.
Oh, I see.
But then a lot of people think like money zero sum. Let's say all these other things are zero
Yeah.
sum. Yeah. And so you live in your entire life as if everything is zero sum. So if I'm happy, that means you're not happy.
You can't be happy
Right.
because it's zero sum.
Zero sum.
It's zero
Very
sum.
good. Very
Yeah. So we define greed as a corrupt desire for gain, right? And of course, holding on to something and not giving, not sharing, not being generous is also a sign of corrupt desire for gain. But when the Bible talks about greed, it seems like it is mostly about riches or money. Is there a reason that is the case? Can greed infiltrate other areas of our lives?
Oh yeah. I mean, the rich man who wanted to tear down his his what do you call those things? Silos, and he wanted to build new ones.
Oh, you silos, not nuclear ones, but where you keep the grain. Just for clarification, because people will be like, "Whoa, silos." Would you have been?
nuclear warheads in the Bible?
No, obviously, but would you have been confused by that, Chinsuk?
No?
Well, aren't you a smart cookie?
Well, let's call him June.
Okay, June had all these silos, non-nuclear.
Good thing there's no Sally here.
Yeah, and so that's also greed. It is a disordered love. I think that's one of the key things that we should take away from this. And I think if I were to boil it all down, greed points to my inability to be satisfied by God, because God is the one that's supposed to fill you. We were made to be filled with God's love, God's provisions, trusting in God. All these things have to do ultimately with God. And then greed is saying, well, I don't trust that. I don't trust God. I need to gather up my own things. I need to go crazy because in this desire of wanting things, because I can't get filled by God. God is not enough to some effect. And so greed is not just a corrupted desire in the Christian sense. We are talking about it as you want something else to fill your heart other than God. And it is a heart issue. If we look at 1 Timothy 6:10, it's a heart issue.
1 Timothy 6:10. And I wanted to just quickly clarify too, before when you were talking about the silos, you were talking about the parable that Jesus teaches regarding the man that tears down his silos and builds a bigger barn, but then he's the fool because his life was going to be taken from him that night, right? That's what you're referencing.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. And this is 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Pangs. What's a pang? Money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Pang is like a sharp pain. So, what do you think this means?
Yeah, a disordered love, the corrupted desire, It's all about a rebellion in the heart, and it's a rebellion against God. And so greed is, I would even go as far as to say all these sins that we were talking about, greed in the same vein, is a desire that has gone wrong. So there is a good desire, the need to be filled, to have your hunger satiated, to want things and to be filled by God. And that desire has gone wrong. And that is, that's greed.
So you earlier talked about being satisfied in God. What does that mean? Because I think some people may have trouble understanding what that is. Is that a feeling? Is that a sense of contentment? What does it mean to be satisfied by God?
You said contentment. A great book is Jeremiah Burroughs' book.
Yep.
We've mentioned it multiple times.
Yeah.
It's the
Rare jewel
of Christian contentment.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite illustrations that Jeremiah Burroughs uses is like the big, what is it? The vase, the big basins. Yeah. And so, if you are content, if you hit the basin, so hardship comes. And when hardship comes, it's like a pang. It's a sharp hit.
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
And then, so does the basin make a loud gong, like a loud noise?
Mhm.
Then that's empty.
Yeah.
If it's full, it makes a different noise. So if you're content, even you take suffering differently. But in the same, let's flip it to greed.
Yeah.
People who are greedy, they're never content. They're always hungry and they're never satiated. That's why the greed is continually just ravaging their soul, because they're not content and they want to be content to, I don't know, they think they'll be satisfied with the things of this world. I just really want to give you, maybe we can play off of this example. So I was thinking about this podcast, and there's an example, or there's just this question that young people, when you're young,
Yeah.
you use. So let's say you could get $10 million right now in your hand.
In my hand, cash.
$10 million.
A lot of moolah.
Yep. You too, June. Okay.
Both of us do.
Each one of you can get $10 million. Anybody that wants $10 million can get $10 million right now in their hand. Okay.
Okay.
There's a catch. The catch is there's a snail.
Okay.
And the snail is going to chase you for the rest of your life. If it touches you, you die.
Oh.
The snail cannot be killed, and it knows your location at all times. And its only purpose, the snail, is to find you.
Yeah.
Are you taking the $10 million in your hand right now?
No, I wouldn't. He's a little greedy though, so he might. I don't
A
know.
snail is very slow.
Okay, but do you know how many hours a day you sleep?
Yeah, but what if you took the $10 million and you flew to the other side of the world?
Yeah.
Can this snail swim?
Yeah, I guess it's like just don't think of it as snails. Think of it as something like snail-esque, but it's
a
supernatural. It'll
snail.
just continually go at 0.03 miles per hour to get
Actually,
you.
no, I think I would be so stressed.
Yeah, me too. That's a
Stressful life.
All right, so
Yeah.
there was a poll done recently, and almost 75%, so almost 3/4 of the people said yes, they'll take it.
Really?
Yeah. They want the 10 mil. It's just in your hand right now if you could use it. And then you think about it. You're always trying to get away from the snail. I think that's a good example of greed. You're always trying to get away from God, but you just want the $10 million. $10 million is okay because you know what? There are other things that could kill you. Why are you so worried about the snail? Snail is just one added thing, eating McDonald's can kill you.
That's true.
A car crash can kill you. All these
Yeah.
other things can kill you. And so a snail is just one other added thing that we need to watch out for. So people will think like that. And then, some other people would say things like, well, all I have to do is fly across the country. So I'll take the $10 million now, $10 million now. And maybe I know where the snail is. And, the whole point of that, that question was you don't know where the snail showed up. But You take a plane, you take the 10 mil, you go across the country. You go to the southern hemisphere, whatever it is, right?
Okay.
Uh,
India.
what?
India.
India, whatever it is. And you live very lavishly in India. You live in the Taj Mahal. I don't know.
Lucky
whatever.
man.
$10 million? I don't know if that could buy you. Let's say
Yeah.
100 million. But
Oh.
anyway, and someone else came up with a scenario where the snail just happens as it was crawling, just happens to crawl on its way on top of a piece of luggage, and the luggage gets on this plane, which happens to be exactly where you are.
Yep. See, I
And
knew
so
this would
now
happen.
the snail is right next to you,
Yep.
because and now you're gonna die. But
Yeah.
and all these things. The point is, why do you want the $10 million? And what people normally do is they do a quick risk assessment. Is this worth
Yeah.
the risk? Right? Would I add any amount of money to add additional risk to my life? Right?
Okay.
And what would that dollar amount be? Depending on, and the snail is a certainty. The snail is a certainty that it'll catch you and then you'll die.
Yeah.
But the point is, I like the scenario this gives because it makes people think, like, we are working so hard. And this is not just an additional thing. Like you guys said, this is something that's always constantly going to be in the back of your head, okay?
Yeah.
You're always constantly going to be thinking about it because that's exactly what greed does. You're always constantly thinking about the stuff that you don't have that you need, the desire. It overtakes you. It consumes you. And that's the only thing that you can think about. That's what greed does to you. And that takes away from your desire to, for God. Not only that, it goes, what I said before, this is why it goes against the desire for God. So no longer do I want God. I need to watch out for the snail. I need to watch out for this greed. It is a consuming desire.
Yeah.
It's not just corrupted, but it is eventually going to be something that will not just debilitate you, even in your life here, it's going to kill you. You're going to die. And so, there are many reasons why I like that little scenario, but it's because you take any amount of money and then you can say $10 million, maybe when you're young, but now because of inflation, we'll say 100 mil, whatever it is, right? Can you live well? And so those are things like, those are things that would probably challenge us in the way we're thinking. And
Can I ask you a question? Actually, no, that's all I do here, right? But let me ask you a fun question. There's a button in the middle of the table, and I asked a youth group this. There's a button in the middle of the table. In the middle of the table, if you press it, there is a 1 out of 5 chance that one of your family members will die. But you will receive $10 million in your bank account. Would you press it?
If you were part of my family?
No, I'm not. This is no. I'm nowhere near. This is just your immediate family. Would you press it?
Did anybody say yes to this?
One of our youth group members immediately said at least 3 times. And we said, why? Why at least 3? He has 3 members in his family. Why at least 3?
I think it's interesting, though, that all these scenarios, the base assumption is that money is just automatically a blessing.
Yeah, and death is a curse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is a curse, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus talks about it. Paul talks about it, like we read in 1 Timothy as well, and many other places, like even in 1 Corinthians 6, greed is someone who will not inherit the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
So this is a surety. This is one of the things that we have been assured of in the word of God. If you are greedy, you will not receive the kingdom of heaven. You will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And so if you are greedy, that means you are unrepentant. And if you're unrepentant, then you are bound for hell. That's what it is. And so even in the basic foundational stuff of even like choosing leaders or elders, you can't be greedy for gain. You can't be greedy for money. If you are automatically disqualified from eldership. And so, look at the elders, look at the pastors. Are they always greedy, looking out for themselves, looking out for, to fill their own needs instead of their desire truly being God and having God fill their needs? if that's the case, they automatically disqualify themselves. And like all sin, the wages of sin is death. And so what you're doing is you're setting up a leader that will inevitably not just go into death, but lead all those that are following him to death as well.
I have another question. So we talked about greed being a corrupt desire for gain. And we talked about perhaps maybe the opposite of that being content, being satisfied in God, most importantly. And I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the way that you explain being satisfied in God is being content in the place that we're in with the things that we have, knowing that it is God who provides.
Yeah, and if you need something, you go to God for it, and then you trust, His good timing.
Right.
The way He fills is in His providence, His sovereignty. It doesn't mean that you don't need anything, but it does mean that you are not in want, and I think that's a different thing between somebody that's in need. So it can be used synonymously, but the reason why even our newer English versions of the Bible still translates Psalm 23 with "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," or "I will not be in want." It doesn't mean that they don't need anything, right? You still need food, you still need clothes. And so it doesn't mean that you don't need anything. What does it mean to be in want? It means that you are lacking ultimately. And you are not ultimately lacking, meaning you are not in want when you have the Lord as your shepherd. And so greed means that you are going to constantly be in want. You are always lacking. That means you are never satisfied. You're never fulfilled. You're never content. You need more and more and more. So it doesn't matter if you have $1 million or $10 million or $100 million, you will not be satisfied. A lot of people think they will, and that's the deceptiveness of greed. I think I mentioned this before, maybe on the podcast or in a sermon. You ask anybody, most people will say, "I will be satisfied if I just get to the next tier in income." So if you're making 50, if you just make 60, you'd be satisfied. If you're making 60, if you just make 80, you'd be satisfied. If you're making 80, if you just made 120, you'd be satisfied. And so those are things where people are constantly looking to the next tier, thinking they'll be satisfied then. But even when they get to that next tier, guess what? They're looking to the tier beyond that. And so it is a hole that is never going to be filled. But let me go to the second part. There's a consequence to that. There's a consequence to your greed, just as there is a consequence to every other sin that we talked about. The consequence of greed is that hole being filled becomes your primary goal in life. Okay, so because you want to make $100,000, and because that's your number one thing, because you believe that will satisfy you, you will do things to reach that goal, even though it is a sin. So that sin will beget more sin. And I think that's one of the key markers of the sins that we are talking about. Every sin that we've talked about so far begets more sin. It never stays with just that one sin. So envy doesn't just stay with envy. Pride doesn't just stay with pride. Lust doesn't just stay with lust. It always moves on. And all these other sins become encompassed in you trying to satisfy this one sin, because that's where we talk about the sin leads to this just infinite abyss of nothingness, of emptiness, of malcontent.
So being satisfied in God, being content in whatever lot we may have, because we know that God is sovereign and is our provider and will provide every good that we have and receive, and we trust in God's will. But can greed ever be a positive thing? So, for example, the distinction between being stingy and being wise, storing up like the ant in Proverbs. How do we distinguish those two? How do we distinguish between hoarding and saving? Because it seems like, saving up and making sure you have enough, making sure that your family's set seems like a positive thing, but it also seems like perhaps you are, holding on to something that you should be giving away. So how do we distinguish between the two?
I think that's a really good question. I think when we go back to 1 Corinthians and we talk about what's going to get burned up and what's going to be left behind, that's something that we learn over time as well. And so, what's going to be burned up? What's going to be left behind? The things that are of Christ will be left behind. The things that are temporal in this world, those things that don't last, they'll be burned up. Not necessarily terrible things, perhaps, but things that won't last. And so, what we are trying to move toward is we're trying to continually do more and more things that will last for all eternity. And what are those things? It's serving the Lord. It's serving your family in faith. It's moving your children toward godliness. So you can physically and outwardly, the show might look similar, but because the heart is different, again, it's the 1 Timothy 6:10 verse that we're talking about here. It can look the same, but because the heart is different, it's a completely different act. Meaning you can feed your kid, right? Well, that's not a bad thing, is it? Well, let's look at the heart. Why are you feeding your kid? Are you bringing your kid towards godliness? Or as you're feeding your kid, you're just like, oh, I need this kid to shut up. And I don't want to go to jail. I don't want CPS to take, and then I'll have a terrible reputation. It can be all selfish reasons that you feed your kid. It really could be. And so we take that act, and what we want to do is we want to bring it down to what is the core reason of why we should do the act? Why should we feed our kid? You don't want your kid to go hungry. Why don't you want your kid to go hungry? Because you want the kid to grow healthy and strong and to continue to mature. Why? Because you want that kid ultimately to know the joys of life, which point to Christ, which point to God, the ultimate good giver. And I skipped a few steps that you can take, possibly you can insert in there. But if you don't go through this thought process and you're just mindlessly going throughout the day, then greed can creep in. It may be one of the most deceitful or deceptive sins that we're going to talk about. Billy Graham would even go on to say, I think I'm quoting here, but greed is probably the parent of more evil than any or all other sins. I think that's a direct quote from Billy Graham. And so it's so deceptive that people take it, and all these other sins are birthed from greed. It produces all other kinds of sins, because what you don't know is that greed is a heart issue. And if your heart is not right, then all these other sins will be birthed, because what you will convince your heart of doing, remember, your heart is probably the most deceptive of all, right? In your organs, in your body, in your soul.
Yeah.
And if you don't get that right, you will give birth to a ton of other sins. I think that's what we have to watch out for. So how do you know that you're not being greedy when you store up, when you save, when you do all these things? Go to the heart. The heart is the issue. If the heart isn't an issue for you, you're just simply saying, I'm just going to mindlessly save because I heard it's a good thing, then you can be susceptible. You might already be duped into this sin of greed.
So if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is even when we are saving, when we are being more frugal, let's say, we have to be able to reflect on our heart, our intention, and see whether that intention is for greed or whether that intention is to be pleasing to the Lord. And obviously feeding your family, housing your family, clothing your family, these are all things that are pleasing to the Lord and something that you should be doing. But I'm curious, what if providing for our own families, in doing that, what if we are being greedy? So how much is too much? How do we determine when we're spoiling our family and children versus providing for them? Because in spoiling them, you are being greedy in that instance, right? So how do you distinguish between the two? Because what I think is appropriate for clothing and feeding and doing whatever my family needs versus another family might be completely different.
Yeah, I think you're looking for outside exercises or just these
like standard or something
expressions of what you think might be greed. How do I know that this expression isn't greed?
Right.
And so I would think that then this is why, number one, this is why we have the church. We have the Word of God. We're grounded in that as we continue to read the Word of God, meditate on it, as we have the church continuing to, as like Hebrews 10 says, stir one another up to love and good works. This is where we continue to push ourselves outside of our own selfish desire. So when you feed your own family out of your own selfish desire, that's still greed. People are like, oh, it's still outside of myself. No, it's not. it's still you. I mean, you could do all these, like, I don't know, philanthropic things in the world.
Yeah.
We could do all this, like, feeding the hungry. You could go do Meals on Wheels, but it could still be greedy because the
Yeah,
heart is the
right,
issue.
Right.
And so, how do I know that something isn't greedy? Then look at the heart. And so, well, is this act an act of greed? Is this act an act of greed? Is this act an act of kindness, or all these
Generosity.
things, generosity?
Yeah.
I would think that then, if you're not going to check the heart, then it's really hard to measure. So, as a church, how do we know that someone has crossed the line? Because I don't know your heart, and sometimes you don't even know your heart.
Yeah.
God knows the heart. So, how can we check if this act truly is? And in one sense, we'll never know. That's why it's so deceptive.
Yeah.
It's so subtly deceptive as well. But at the same time, there are times when we know we've crossed the line. Okay. So let's say you steal from your company. You know you've crossed the line.
Ooh.
Let's say you don't pay taxes. You know you've crossed the line. Let's say you don't feed your kid. You know you've crossed the line. So
Yeah,
there are
yeah.
obvious things that have crossed the line where someone with a gracious heart, or a heart that is going after the Lord, would never do. They would not steal from other people.
Yeah.
They would not feed their kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so those are things that we would know for sure. So when you know that they've crossed the line, then you bring them back through discipline. Now, even if they stop doing those things, do we know for sure that they have come back and they have a heart that is genuinely, for the Lord? No, you don't. You don't
Yeah,
know for
yeah.
sure. But what we do know is that when they have crossed the line, we have to do something as far as, let's say, church discipline is concerned. So let's say for greed, how do I know that, someone else isn't greedy, especially if they're like, well, I want to feed my kid, not your kid. How do I know that's an act of greed? And you might not know for sure. You always want to give people the benefit of the doubt. You always want to remember what the Bible says, where it says the love covers all wrongdoing. And so you want to give people grace. But at the same time, through love, you want to bring them back to, a place that is not good through discipline. So let's say this person constantly takes things from other kids, gives it to his own kid.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, get that toy out of your hands, give it to my kid, Adeline. I don't know, random name. And
That's not random.
and then that's all you do. Then that, I believe, is something that can be under discipline.
Yeah.
Because wait, why are you doing this when you're not looking out for any other kid? You're only looking out for your own kid. Is this some kind of extension of selfish desire, selfish gain, some insecurity that you have, where you're not really content, you're not filled with God? And you could always explore the options. And so if this person is continually unrepentant and continually, even after you give him, this kind of sage advice, this warning, and this person continues to act in this manner, then I believe discipline is the next step.
So I'm curious. Obviously, how people spend money is based on personal preference and on their heart, like we were just talking about. But are there any maybe foundational biblical principles that we can look to as we spend our money? And I wanted to also ask, as a sidebar, the Bible encourages us to take care of the poor.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that when we do our budget, our family budget for the year, a percentage should be going to the poor? And how do we live out that how do we live that out? Giving to the poor, being generous to the poor. How do we do that on a regular basis as a family if we want to go by what the Word of God is encouraging us to do?
Yeah, I am mournful and grieved when I think about this question. Not because probably of what other people might think, but because of where we are now.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have such a globalistic mindset.
Yeah.
We think that the poor is someone like 5,000 miles away.
Right.
We have to help them. We never think about the poor next to us. And so if every Christian thought about the poor person next to us in our community, in our family, in those that in our vicinity, then you know what? Poverty would already have been drastically reduced. But what we do is we try to think of poor people as someone outside, someone whose names we don't know, someone that is on the street or something to that effect. And this is why cities are such a mess, because there's so many people in the streets and they're like, we have to help the poor. We have to help the poor. Let me give money to this agency. And the agency isn't a Christian agency. Agency is just someone that will pay themselves an inordinate amount of money. I think the what is it? The nonprofit CEOs and these like big food banks make over 6 figures.
Wow.
And it's insane because it never deals with the issue that we talked about. It never deals with the issue of the heart. So you could always disconnect the heart from your giving. It could always be something like, well, I don't want to feel guilty. So
Yeah.
let me just give $10 here, $10 there. And then boom, I can shut off my mind. That's not how it works. In fact, what the Christian call is much harder than that, to just set aside some money regularly. And that could be part of it. But the Christian conscience that we're given is much more deeper. It's weightier than just giving money. It is caring for those that are in need. How do you care for those that are in need if they're 6,000 miles away and then you're just saying, I'm going to give $10 and then I'm not going to think about them anymore? If they have a GoFundMe, I'll pay the GoFundMe. And then people are like, well, what are you saying? Like, I shouldn't pay the GoFundMe? It's like, no, you can't shut off your conscience by giving $10 to a GoFundMe after you give $10 to GoFundMe. That's not how the Christian conscience works. And what we are to do then is, are there people that are in need of care in our vicinity right now? How are we caring for them? Is it simply with money? It could be one of those things. And I think that's what the apostles did. When they had money, they gave it away. When they didn't have money, they would go to the temple. It's like, I don't have money, but what I could give you is this. In Jesus' name, rise up and walk. And the person was able to walk. So they're able to give the gospel, which is primary, to the money. But obviously, what you don't want to do is just say Jesus saves and not feed the hungry or clothe the naked. That's not what you want to do. But the way that you give the gospel is you share the gospel and you share life along with the gospel. So if there is a need, you fill it. That's how you stir one another up to do love and good works, is you actually express it fully in your life. So in that sense, who are those that are around you? Who is in your family who doesn't know Jesus Christ, who is poor, who is maybe backslidden, who is outside of the camp, who is in sin? You start with those people. And then eventually, I think the church will grow. There will be the poor that will come among us. And that's primarily who the Bible addresses. It's like when Paul talks about communion in 1 Corinthians, there are those that are poor among you, and then you don't even feed them. You feed yourselves first. And you're not even doing communion. You're just feeding yourself, is what he essentially is saying. And that's what happens when you continue to spread the gospel. People come into the church, and the poor are fed because they're coming into the church. And then we're sharing our goods. We're sharing those with those that are in need. And that's something that we do in the church. We naturally, our heart goes out to those that we see who's, and I'm going to say, you got to know the names. You got to know the lives. You can't just stand online in the soup kitchen thinking that's the only thing that you can do to help the poor. It could be one of those things. And I think it's a very good thing, but I don't think it's the only thing. And I don't think it's even the main thing. So let's say your kid is really hungry at home. But you're like, no. I got homeless people to feed. And so you're standing on this food line trying to give out food in this food kitchen. But your kid is starving at home. Are you doing right by this kid? Are you doing right by God? And I think the answer is no, like absolutely no. And so we take so much focus and put it on you standing on a soup kitchen that we have lost focus of the person that is right next to us. And again, is it bad that we serve in the food kitchen? Absolutely not. It's because our family, so the first Christian families were so strong that it bubbled over and it went over to wet nurses going out and picking up babies in the street because they saw that this was such a desperate need. Imagine those wet nurses didn't help their own children but went out into the streets instead. That wouldn't make any sense. You're seeing there was such an abundant supply that they had inside that they find it necessary to go even outside. So many people are focused on the outside first.
Yeah.
And it has flipped. And now we put all these modifiers and adjectives to justice. I'm going to say this, like, this is an absolute truth. Any modifier you put to justice, you've corrupted justice. Any modifier you put to justice, you've corrupted justice. I don't care if it's social justice. I don't care if it's economic justice. I don't care if it's climate justice. I heard the word climate justice today, and I was just,
I don't
my
even know
goodness.
what that is.
We are just putting anything in front of justice
Yeah.
and just trying to guilt people into giving up their freedoms, their power, their money, their possessions, all in the name of justice.
Right,
you know?
right.
And that's wrong. And we have flipped it. Now the gospel is social justice. Now government is necessary for helping the poor or feeding the poor. We don't need government to feed the poor. The reason why the government is feeding the poor is because we have done a terrible job at number one, understanding what the government is. Number two, actually feeding the poor ourselves. And like I said, if every church stood up and said, we're going to feed the poor in our community, feed those that are around us. There are churches almost everywhere now, right?
Yeah.
I guess it's dropping now. But when there was, the poverty level would have declined dramatically. The fact that we're not doing it, I think this is a judgment. Government is now overreaching beyond its biblical mandate and authority and jurisdiction that it has. And it's going on now to take your taxpayer dollars and then feed the poor with that. And what happens in between? A ton of corruption happens in between. That's obvious. It's obvious a ton of corruption will happen in between, because what happens when you funnel millions of dollars through multiple agencies to eventually get to, let's say, the tomato soup that someone's gonna eat? A ton of things. And so why are we surprised when all this corruption happens, when you could have just given that person tomato soup yourself? It's not happening because we have lost sight of what we were meant to do, and we're only feeding ourselves, meaning greed has overtaken our souls, our consciences are seared when it comes to material goods, and we're thinking nothing about our neighbor. And now we've even flipped that to, this social justice garbage, and where we can't even think about our neighbor. Now it's, we got to give to this agency's good. BLM gets a ton of money. BLM is good, all these things. And so why are we surprised when we see a ton of corruption, when we see our money squandered, when we see like taxes, up the roof, completely unbiblical? What is our taxes like? Progressive tax excluded. The average tax rate is 30%. The Bible mandates 10% to God. Why is the government taking more than God? No one knows. No one can say. It's just the natural order of things now. It's insane.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the taking care of the poor and being generous, this is primarily the role of the church scattered, whereas worship and hearing the word being preached is primarily the purpose of the church gathered.
It's just the church, yeah. It's
Right.
just the church.
No, because the reason why I wanted to say that was because I think people will always come back and say, well, what's your church doing? What's your church doing for the poor? Like, what's your church doing? Like, how come you guys don't go to, food lines and go out to the poor and go out to the streets of Teaneck and do X, Y, and Z? But then I know that on this podcast, and you have many times said, the church gathered worships together and the church scattered is supposed to do those things. We're supposed to do what God has commanded us to do.
Yeah, I mean, but we still do those things that people say, but we don't make it a point where this is the brunt of our work. And look, by saying this, it's going to sound like I'm calling out other places, but
Yeah.
I'm not.
Okay.
I don't like it when we hear of stories, and this is why we specifically don't do that. When we go to a place, and then let's say, this is, they need farm equipment. Okay, I'm going to try to keep it as far from the truth, from the real example as possible. They need
Yeah.
farm equipment. So we
Okay.
go and we donate a tractor.
Oh.
Yeah, we donate a tractor. We give them some seeds.
Oh.
We do a huge, fundraising event.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gather tens of thousands of dollars to get this tractor even shipped. And then we go, we celebrate, we take a bunch of pictures, we come back and we tell our congregation. And then, in the tractor, we have to etch in CGS.
Our church's name, yeah.
The church gathered and scattered. It's kind of etched in. So
Yeah.
people, remember to glorify God, right?
Right.
And so I don't like that. I kind of hate it.
Mm.
And so this is not what we do. I'm not saying that we're better than those that actually do this.
Yeah.
But I'm saying there's an incredible danger in doing that, where you feel now you have completed the desire, like the task
Yep.
of helping the poor by doing that. I don't think so. I think it's a constant thing that we continually do, where we're always preaching the gospel, we're living the gospel. We will end up preaching the gospel to the poor. The poor will come into our churches. And how are you providing for them? If you're not doing that, then I think you are in a terrible position. And I get it. There are people who will etch, their church names on the tractors and still do all those things. And I will say, maybe you didn't need to really etch the church name on the tractor, but
Yeah.
That's great. I'm glad you did it. Maybe they've come up with a reason why we need the church name etched. Maybe someone else is going to look at it and be like, "Oh, who gave you this tractor?" Oh yeah, if we want a tractor too. He's like, "Why don't you contact CGS?"
So, and I'm asking this because our opponents, not our opponents, but those who may perhaps oppose the view that we may have, will say, well, show me your good deeds. Show me what you have done for the poor. What does CGS do for the poor? Do you guys do anything? How would we respond to that?
I guess we could rattle off a list of what we do. We help those that are in need, maybe with scholarship. We do some food bank drives throughout the year, a number of them actually, and even coat drives. And people have donated generously. We do things like What Samaritan Purse, the Operation Christmas Child. So we have a number of things I can continue on.
Right.
Do I think those things are primary? And that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
I think the answer is no. I think it comes from the overflow of our hearts. And so we are helping those that are around us.
Mhm.
If you're not helping those that are around us and you just do a ton of, Operation Christmas Child boxes, did you do your part? And I
Right.
think, that's a tough one for me to say yes, because I think your heart is not there. And we could rattle off stuff, but I don't think that's beneficial to anybody. I think churches will naturally do it as they continue to grow.
Yeah.
They'll continue to, help more and more. And so I think the health of the church is very important. The maturity of the church is very important. There are those that are convicted to help certain groups of people, perhaps. We even have something like scholarship funds. I don't know if did I mention that?
You did.
I have scholarship funds for those that might be having trouble or need help paying for certain, education, higher education that they need the tuition money for.
Yeah.
And so those are things that we do. It is from the overflow. It is because we purposely and thoughtfully corner off funds to help people, because that's what we have been convicted to do. But it is all under the gospel, meaning
Right.
our primary objective is to tell people about the salvation in Jesus Christ and in no one else. And so if you feed people without sharing the gospel, what have you really done?
Nothing.
You gave them a meal, they're going to poop it out and it's gone.
Yeah.
What is of eternal value here?
Yeah.
If you feed people and you bring them into the fellowship of Christ, that's eternal.
Yeah.
That's what I want people to remember. There are examples that I probably can use to show where this isn't truly black and white. So as a young man, I lived in the city. And in the city, I had a personal policy. And the personal policy is whenever I see a panhandler, I know they were illegal back then. I don't know if they are now. The city is trash, and it's filled with trash. But whenever I would see a panhandler, it was a personal thing of mine to always give them the cash in my pocket. And, if it was a lot of cash, give them a lot of cash. If it was little cash, give them a little cash. It's just a thing. And then I personally went out of my way to say, God bless you. Jesus loves you. Get cleaned up. Whatever I could say. And then the person would be shocked at the amount of money I would give them. I don't know. Back then, I guess it was a lot. I'd give them like $100 bill or something, or $20 bill, something, whatever was in my pocket. And the reasoning I had as a young man was because, well, I could use the $100 on myself. That's great. Nothing wrong with that. But maybe a lot of times the $100 will be used on frivolous things. So even if this person uses it on frivolous things, it's no different from me using it on frivolous things. But if I use it for good, maybe this person will also use it for good. So I just made sure it's like, get yourself some food, get out of the streets. It's dangerous. Something. I'll just say something quick.
Yeah.
But I'll make sure to call them. This is something that I heard from Tolstoy. But I'll make sure I call them brother or sister, because I want them to know that as far as the human race is concerned, we're all brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
But I really want them to come into the fold of Christ. I'm not going to sit there while I'm commuting to work to give them the whole gospel presentation, but I'll give them as much as I can on my way. Yeah, and I was with someone once, and a panhandler came to the window when I was in the city, and they were disgusted. And I was like, "Why are you disgusted?" And I just gave them, I did my own thing. My usual thing of giving them the money and the change I had. I remember specifically that instance because I took a detour because the GW was packed. And so I had to take a detour in the city to go out another way. And in that detour, there was a panhandler plus a bunch of other cars, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I just said, it was an old lady, and I felt for the lady because the streets are very dangerous for a woman. And I said, God bless you. And then she held my hand back this time and said, thank you so much for this. And I really appreciate it. God bless you too. It's like, you know what? I just want you to get out of this street. It's like, yes, I will. I'll do my best and things like that. I don't know if she did,
Yeah.
But what can you do with what you have is it can be personal conviction. It can be when the opportunity presents itself, but it's always, I have to say, it's always out of the overflow of your heart. If your heart is filled with malice, if your heart is filled with greed, there's no way that you're doing this out of good intent. And you can have perhaps the same motto I have. And it's not, and I hope this wasn't a segment to puff whatever I did. I'm trying to show what kind of thought process would have gone through my head to maybe help those that are still confused about how do I help the poor.
Yeah.
The poor will come up to you. You will be, you will come in contact with the poor.
Right.
That's inevitable.
Right.
What you do then is through conscience. But now, if I am saying that I need to put some kind of modifier on this justice, social justice, environmental justice, climate justice, it's always going to, there's a disparate impact on these types of communities. And so we must change the system here. You're absolutely doing nothing personally that's going to cost you nothing to help someone who's actually poor. And what you're doing, in fact, we can argue. We can argue what you are doing is actually going to create more problems and increase poverty is what we are seeing in these cities. But they will not go away from these bankrupt policies to say that actually the policies are wrong. We shouldn't have been doing this. We should actually incentivize people to do good. Perhaps the government can do that, but we shouldn't be the ones out there providing money that will go into these corrupt practices that we are not litigating, that we're not actually bringing to actual justice this corruption. But we're just saying the system is corrupt. The system is corrupt. Well, actually, you're corrupt. San Francisco is corrupt. New York City is corrupt. All these big cities, Chicago is corrupt. All these big cities who have so many poor people are actually the ones increasing corruption, increasing poverty, because what they are not doing and what they are incapable of doing is actually changing the heart. And that's what they think that they could do with their policies. They can't change the heart. And when their heart is not changed, they're all confused. So what they will do is they'll try to grab for more power, more power, more power, more money, more taxes. And they're continually doubling down on what's not working. The Bible is clear on this. It's a heart issue, and a heart issue is changed by God. We bring people to repentance through the gospel, and there is no other way. When we see other nations like actually changing, isn't it also through the common grace of God of the Christians affecting these other nations, other neighbors? So our neighbor is affected, even though he's not Christian, our neighbor is affected when we do good things. When let's say little things like, let's say you have to mow the lawn in your house and you go, now we don't do that. No one mows their lawns in Jersey.
Yeah.
Like we hire
We
people.
don't have lawns.
But a long time ago, people used to mow their own lawns. And what people would do as an act of kindness to their neighbor, they would go, outside of their own boundaries and, say, you know what, I'm already here. Can I mow your lawn? And then they're like, yeah, sure. And then people will mow the other person's lawn. They'll take care of each other is my point.
Yeah.
And that extends, that's how communities are built and sustained, how they grow, mature, how they thrive, how they grow in prosperity. That's how it grows. It's not through soup kitchens. And I really want people to get this. People think that they will eradicate poverty through soup kitchens. That is so wrong.
Yeah.
That's so false. We do soup kitchens because that is how we get people from stopping from starving. But that's not the same thing as having people thrive.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
have people thrive through soup kitchens. You have people maybe stopping from dying. That's why it's necessary. You don't want people to die. It's like a lifeguard who goes and jumps in the water and saves people. But that doesn't mean this person will now have a great life. You save this person from dying, which is absolutely necessary. But if that person is dying, but that's not how people thrive. And
Right.
we've confused the two in thinking social justice is not what's going to help people thrive. Absolutely not. In fact, social justice, I believe, is why people are even more poor today.
Thank you for that. Yeah, definitely interesting. Maybe we'll talk about the different justices on an episode, but that's a interesting topic, I think, for us to think about in the future. I wanted to close off this section of because we actually have a lot to get to this morning. I wanted to close off this section by asking one final question. And it's maybe some pastoral wisdom that we can garner. Are there biblical principles that we can all live by in the way that we spend our money, in a way that we can check ourselves and not be greedy, but rather be generous as God has commanded us to be?
Yeah, I think it first has to do with contentment. You know what? Let's read the verses before 1 Timothy 6:10. Let's just go from 1 Timothy 6 to 10.
1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 to 10 reads, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs."
Yeah, so I'm glad you read that last part again because it connects to the top part. Godliness with contentment is great gain. So our desire is for God, a desire to be like God, and we are content because we have our ultimate desire fulfilled. We are not in want. We have our Lord as our shepherd. Then think about it this way. If I'm content with the set of clothing like that I have, and I get another set of clothing, you know what? I'm already content with what I have. And I see that you need a set of clothing. I was like, hey, brother, I already have a set of clothing. How about you take this one?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful picture, in my opinion, because you're already content with what you have. And if another person's in need, you're like, you know what? I already have one. Why don't you take one too? You know what? I already have some food here. How about we share some lunch and then you could save some money? That's a community that we see being birthed in godliness with contentment. That's what it's talking about. And that's a wonderful, wonderful picture that we see that the Bible give us that we should strive for. And so does the Bible give us ways that we can be not greedy and content? Absolutely. There's so many pictures that it does give us, and that this being one of them. Zacchaeus being another one, right? When he finally found Jesus, he gave his possessions away. He paid his debt back, and more so, multiple fold, and he gave half his money to the poor, meaning he wanted to give money to those that didn't have. And I think when we read that now, again, I just want to reiterate one more time, the poor is not some abstract group that we just give money to.
Yeah.
The poor was literally those that were in the community. Remember, the Jewish people were a community.
Mhm.
The town people were a community. When, Zacchaeus gave money to the poor, that didn't mean, obviously in that context, it didn't mean that he was giving money to the poor people in Africa or more poor people in Asia. That's not
Right.
what it meant.
Right.
It meant that he gave money to those that were in his community.
Yeah.
And so getting that, man, people are going to be upset if you're a social justice warrior. If you're SJW, that's going to really upset you, huh?
SJWs. Yeah.
Yeah. But obviously, we have to start from home. We have to start from where we are. You start from the church. Look for those that are in need. If there are people in need, you share with them. And that extends outward. It really does. And if you're just so focused on the outward and not the inward, then I think you have something wrong with your desire. Something's wrong with your heart. You just need to somehow get a checkbox. Like you have to check a box in your, social order list. And then you think that you could feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
Look at all these SJWs. They are not satisfied. They are angry. They're angry that other people don't feel as good as, quote unquote, they do. They're angry that they are not as good as they are. So they'll just, rant and rave on social media or whatever it is, and just say things to, make people guilty. The reason why you don't do this is because you don't love them. That's something to that effect.
Right.
And that to me is, it's very sad when I see stuff like that, but it's prevalent throughout our social media feeds, unfortunately, and very grievously, like I'm grieving in that sense is a lot of people that, believe that they belong to the church. A lot of church leaders also kind of mimic this social justice mantra.
So, I think your answer made me think of another question. So here we go. If we are not content, we've been talking about contentment, satisfaction in God. If we are not content, what can we do? What should we do? How do we turn? How do we become content in the Lord?
Yeah, if you're not content, I think you are in either deep sin or in danger of sin. So take it seriously. Take it seriously. If you don't feel contentment right now, go to God, because God is the source. And it could be because of tragedy. I don't know. It could be because of tragedy. You don't feel that contentment. But I got to tell you, people who go through tragedy and already have great contentment don't feel lacking in their tragedy. They feel sadness. They feel grief, but they don't feel lack. Those are different things.
Yeah.
And so when you read the book, How Long, O Lord, by D.A. Carson, he even mentions in the beginning, this book is good for people who aren't grieving yet or before they go into a place of grieving, because by that time it might be too late, right? And so you want to get to a place of contentment before it's too late, meaning you find you're already in lack or want, and then when you get hit, you come upon hard times or tragedy, then that becomes like an abyss that you look down that looks very, very, very dark.
Yeah.
That's not what I want anybody to go through. And so as dark and as terrible as it is, we don't find contentment in the world. One thing I've noticed is that with every, shooting or something like that, like there was even a Texas shooting. There's all these GoFundMes that are being done. You know what? I haven't seen. Maybe there has been, but I haven't seen many GoFundmes for the Nashville shooting victims.
Hmm.
No one cares about them now. They probably already forgotten about those 3 9-year-olds and the 3 adults that were shot and killed by this lunatic.
It's probably because they're Christian, white, and affluent.
Well, maybe that's what they think.
Yeah.
But you know what? I pray for them, and I pray
Yeah.
that they would find contentment in God, and that they already have it.
Yeah.
They don't need a GoFundMe to find contentment. And
Right.
if they had, it wouldn't, increase or decrease their contentment. They would be content.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. I think people who aren't content will never be content. You'll be like that big basin where tragedy hits you, and that sound will be loud. It will ring loud, and it'll just be a sad sight for those to witness.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And this morning, I wanted to go into a current event that's been on our news cycle as of late, has caused a lot of debate. And so we will talk about that now. On May 1st, Jordan Neely, a homeless man in New York City, was held down by a U.S. Marine veteran, Daniel Penny, in a headlock on the subway. Neely, according to news outlets, had begun shouting at passengers on the subway, saying that he was hungry, thirsty, and had little to live for. So, in response to aggressive threats that Neely started to pose against the passengers on the subway, Daniel Penny, with the help of others, acted to protect himself and others until help arrived. And this was putting Mr. Neely in a headlock until he stopped breathing and eventually actually died. I think it's a sad thing, a sad, scary thing whenever anyone passes knowing the judgment that they will face after this life. And so it goes without saying that it is sad that Jordan Neely has passed. But now there's much argument, much debate on how to view this. Some call it a murder. Some call it self-defense. There's a lot of noise and even protests bringing into consideration the color of Jordan Neely, a black man, and Daniel Penny, a white man. There's also discussions on mental health, on homelessness, on the government's lack of response to the homelessness crisis, and also the mental health crisis. All these discussions are happening and everyone is talking over each other. But as a Christian, how do we view this? I think there's a lot of topics to discuss here. There's even an aspect of preservation of life, right? People say Christians are so gung-ho about preserving life and, when it comes to abortion. But how about this? How come we're not so quick to jump to justice for the death of this homeless man? Questions like that. How do we, as a Christian, view what is happening right now?
I'm sure people have a lot of info on Jordan Neely if you are on social media.
Yeah.
It's kind of old news by now.
Yeah.
I think more people are talking. Well, as of today, more people are talking about Trump being on CNN. But
he was, yeah.
Yeah. It is a tragic situation when anybody dies. That's fact. I think there are 2 camps, and these 2 camps are irreconcilable. The number one camp is Jordan Neely is a victim of systematic oppression and racism, and his death demands justice be done. Number 2 is Jordan Neely was he had 40 plus arrests.
42, yeah.
And he was terrorizing subway riders. The cops did nothing. There were no law enforcement officers to protect the passengers from his abuse, his terrorization, right? His terrorizing. And when he, at the time, went to make threats against other people, a few men stood up and restrained him, not just this Marine.
Yep, 2 others.
2 others did, and they are not mentioned. Maybe because they were people of color, I don't know. But it was the white person that was mentioned, and also because he was the person who had him in the chokehold.
Yeah.
And so those are the 2 camps. I think the 2 camps agree that every death, no, not really. they could agree that Jordan Neely's death was a tragedy.
Yeah.
What's irreconcilable is the first camp will say it's this white man's fault.
Mm-hmm.
He deserves punishment. That's what justice is. And the second camp will say it's Jordan Neely's own fault for terrorizing so many subway riders for the last 10 years or so. I don't know. They put out like a bunch of politicians, like, I don't know if everyone's familiar, Rashida Tlaib and Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They put up these videos of Jordan Neely doing like a Michael Jackson bit
On the subway. Yep.
That was from like 2012. You know, a lot of time has passed. And he doesn't do that bit anymore. He goes around terrorizing people.
Yeah.
There's videos of him like kicking women in the back so that their heads smash into the subway on the platform, pushing people onto the platform. There are multiple social media warning posts saying if you're in New York City, these are like, you know, forums, like Reddit forums, like that are still in existence. You can still look it up today. They're saying, watch out for this person, and Jordan Neely, and the face is there. This person terrorizes people. If he's near you, then be very careful because he'll, in an instant, just, you know, push you right onto the tracks and you can die.
Yeah.
There are multiple posts warning about this person's behavior. He was obviously mentally ill for whatever, you know, number of years. And now what we want to do is we want to pin the death of Jordan Neely on a Marine who restrained him when he was making threats at other passengers. And so I think we are in an impasse. What makes me very sad is after that incident, people protested, quote unquote, protested his death by jumping onto the train tracks in New York City.
Yep.
I think number one rule is don't jump onto train tracks for whatever reason.
Nope.
Or try not to, at least, you know,
Try.
make it like a very low priority on your list. Yeah. And so I think there are two different types of groups here at play. And that's what really saddens me. I will never be able to reconcile with the first group who think that this is strictly just systematic racism. This has nothing to do with personal responsibility. And the Marine is guilty of murder. I will never be on that side. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to anybody that would have a semblance of what justice is. Justice has to be individual. It's not corporate. When God judges you, he doesn't judge you as a people group. He judges you.
Yep.
And so justice ultimately comes down to the individual. And so to have this person, this Marine, be outed by the Marines outed him, you know that. And I don't even know what to make of that. What happened to Semper Fi? I guess no longer when it comes to DEI and ESG and social justice. You just throw your own people under the bus because this new religion is primary, above Semper Fi, above fealty to the Marine Corps. And so they threw him under the bus by outing him, by doxing him, basically saying this is his name.
Yeah.
And I feel very bad for this man who thought that he was doing right.
Yeah.
Did he go too far? Did he go, maybe he could have restrained him some other way? I looked at the video and, you know, I can't say for sure. I think that's why, you know, a court case will be there. But let me just tell you, maybe like, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, this wouldn't have been a thing. It's a thing because he's black and now we're on this tirade against white people. And I'm very, very sorry for this Marine who thought he was doing good by temporary or potentially keeping people from what looked like imminent harm.
Yeah.
And now the police didn't step up. Where are the police? They're not doing their job because they're going to be reprimanded. They could be fired for it. They could be fined. They could be sued, you know? So why would they do their jobs? And so this person took it into his own hands with two other gentlemen, I think. and now this person is facing prison time.
I think in response to people that may think, Christians, aren't we supposed to preserve life? Even, we bring up Bonhoeffer and how his attempt at assassinating Hitler was wrong. I think the distinguishing factor is the intent, right? When people talk about abortion, it's you're purposefully going in to murder your child versus this Marine veteran who was trying to protect others and wasn't trying to kill this individual. His aim wasn't to kill. His aim was just to restrain until law enforcement arrived. And so I think that is a key difference for people that may even be wondering something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that was in his statement, and he was sorry that the person died. But, we're never happy when someone dies.
Right.
But you can take life in defense of life.
Yep.
And that needs to be in the acute sense, not this whole like systematic nonsense where they're just twisting everything. You're killing me by not accepting me.
Right.
Whatever that is. That's not what we mean. We mean by if someone's wielding a knife and running at you, then you can restrain him. And if that person's life is taken, the one wielding the knife, then you are not culpable. You're not liable for this person's death because you are protecting yourself, your own body.
Right.
And so, this is the kind of insane upside down world we're kind of living in right now that we're witnessing. And what really makes me more sad are the Christians or the so-called Christians who are on the side number one.
Yeah.
That's what makes me sad. And I do believe that at this point, there is no reconciliation between those two groups. You can't think that this is a part of some kind of systematic injustice, and at the same time say this person had a right to defend his life and the passengers around him.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a sad situation, the event itself and also the aftermath of it. But I think it's something for us to think about continually as the social justice movement, as you have defined it and talked about it, is continuing to grow and gain momentum. I think it's something that we need to be well aware of and well equipped against.
Yeah, and that's why that social justice statement.
Yeah.
That what it was in 2018. I think it was 2018. That was written. I think that's so important for churches to adopt. And you may not adopt it. And I think the bigger question then for me is, why aren't you going to adopt this? It's a biblical document. And so if you're not going to adopt it, it's because you want to give in to whatever degree to this social justice movement.
Was it the statement on social justice?
Mm-hmm.
September 4th, 2018.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll include a link of that in our description page. Oh, this is the one that like John MacArthur, Voddie Baucham, they all signed.
Yeah. Also, Vesta Sproul.
Gotcha.
R.C. Sproul's wife.
Right.
Yeah, because R.C. Sproul passed in 2017.
Yeah. Wow, a lot of people signed this. So I'll include that in our description page. Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we have a discussion on lust. This is going to be exciting. Tune in next week to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. Peace.